podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Find the biggest voices in sport on the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Like the multi-award-winning Fight Disciples podcast with me, Nick Peet, and my sparring partner and best mate, Adam Cattrall. Throughout the week, we discuss the biggest news in fight sports, from Tyson Fury's latest comeback to the return of Conor McGregor and everything in between. Allow us to take you closer to the action at home and abroad as we go behind the scenes at all the monster fights in both boxing and mixed martial arts. Search Fight Disciples and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome to How Are the Podcast, and you join us the morning after Sunderland lost their third successive home game in the Premier League at the Stadium of Light on a frustrating Saturday afternoon. It was an afternoon that not even my lucky till the end socks could do anything about, as the lads went down to Brighton and Hove Albion with a bizarre goal that will try and explain exactly what happened. And we'll also try and explain exactly what happened in terms of the performance as well, because I have two gentlemen with me to try and do just that. And first up, we have Martin Wanless. Hello, Martin.
Oh, Chris, it's becoming a bit of a nasty habit, this, isn't it? Getting together on a Sunday morning to discuss the defeat. But let's hope we don't have too many more of them, at least until the end of the season. But I think there's actually quite a lot to talk about in this game, because there was... look, we'll get into it. I think there was a lot of things that went right and a lot of things that went wrong and could have got an awful lot better.
Well, I can always tell during games like this, I can always almost tell how Sunderland are going and how it's playing out by the amount of messages I get from you, Martin, or I see from you. You were very quiet yesterday. Very
quiet, and yes, with good reason.
Yeah. Looking forward to getting your takes on it. But also with us from the Sunderland Echo, we're very glad to be joined by Jason Jones. Hello, Jason.
Morning, lads. We all good?
Yeah, I'm trying to decide, and I'll probably know better after we talk it all through, because just getting into kind of the feel around the place. I mean, you may gauge it from being around the place, talking to people or your colleagues or whatever, but it just seems like the atmosphere around the place is just generally flat. And I'm talking about on the pitch, off the pitch, just around the club at the minute.
It's been a difficult spell, hasn't it? I think obviously results have mirrored that. And I do think that it feels as if there's been a bit of a loss of momentum, if we're being completely frank about it. Obviously, the FA Cup last weekend certainly didn't help matters, because I think where Sunderland now find themselves, that kind of felt like a real opportunity to pursue something through to the last stages of the season. I think that obviously exiting unexpectedly against Port Vale has kind of left Sunderland in a position where, they're not really in danger of looking down with too much fear, but I also suspect that they're maybe not looking up with too much realistic aspiration anymore either. And then, like you say, obviously results like yesterday only really compound that. So I don't think that anybody around the club would say that, there's a sort of lull or anything like that, because I think that Sunderland still deserve to be commended hugely for what they've achieved this season. And I also think, I'm sure this is something we'll get into, but it is probably worth reiterating just how beleaguered they are at the moment, how many players are out, and obviously how that's impacting things at the present moment in time. Obviously, Derby next weekend as well, which always gives you something to play for. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's certainly been a loss of something in recent weeks, and obviously results like yesterday don't exactly help in that regard, do they?
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, Martin, just on this topic, I mean, it sounds weird, doesn't it? Because like as Jason's just said, that everyone does have this kind of feeling around the club at the moment, but it's almost, we just had a cracking result if you go back to the Premier League, and Bris was trying to emphasise this as much as possible when everyone was focusing on Port Vale. He was saying before this game, we've been really good in the Premier League. We drew at Bournemouth, we played really well, we played fantastically well at Leeds, got a good result. And he said, we almost should have been celebrating getting to that 40 points, and it should be a time of celebration in the season, and it just doesn't feel like that.
No, it's strange, isn't it? And, the feeling that you get and the mood that you get from you're coming out of the club and around the club, you'd kind of think that we were in absolutely diabolical form. But in the last 11 games, we've picked up 11 points, which is kind of on par for staying up, isn't it? That's on par for the 40 points over the course of the season. So it's not as if we've gone 11 games with 10 defeats and 1 draw. We're actually picking up points. We're chugging away all right. And the number of injuries that we've got, I think it's dead easy to overlook. But if you look at that bench yesterday, there's 3 or 4 or 5 players who've barely played first team football for us. So we are really scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of availability and squad. We picked up another injury or 2 yesterday, and hopefully they're not too serious. But I think the biggest thing that we've seen all season is we're good. We play our best if we're really good out wide. I think that's where it's different. We've got experience and we've got consistency through the middle with people like Dan Ballard and Alderete and Xhaka and Siddiqui. We've got reliability and consistent performances in the centre of the field and Brian Brobby up front. And we haven't got that out wide. And I think if you look yesterday at the team that we had, you could name 5 players at least who would be playing out wide if they were fit. You've got Mukiele, Reynaldo, Traore, Enzo Lefebvre, Nilson Angulo. All of them, or four of those 5, would be in the starting lineup if everybody was fit. So we've almost got a second choice wide areas playing, wide midfield, full backs. And I just think we haven't got a deep enough squad to cope with that effectively. So it makes it all the more difficult. Like I know, again, we'll get right into the game. I thought Chris Rigg was a real bright point yesterday. I thought he looked really sharp. I thought he looked fantastic, playing out of position as well. And, you've got players like that who can come in and do a job. But I think, we haven't got the depth of squad to cope with the volume of injuries that we've got. And I just think we all need to take a step back and look at all of this whole thing in context, because we're mid-table in the Premier League. We've hit 40 points at the start of March. Yes, we've had a couple of bad results in the last 3 home games. It's been disappointing not to pick up a single point from the 3 of them. But the game yesterday, it's like we've said about pretty much every game that we've won this season, Chris. It's changed on moments. In that game yesterday, I don't actually think we played too differently to other games that we've won. And a moment here, a moment there, we could have been coming away with a 1-0 or 2-0 victory. So I think it's really important that we don't go mad and lose our shit over this, because perspective is absolutely required, I think, for this conversation.
Yep, everyone should log out of the socials as quickly as possible after Martin's statement there. But
that's a general rule for life, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But Jason, just to build off Martin's point, and I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit with it, because look, we can go back to the press conference on Thursday. We're all looking forward to Broby and Sergen being back fit and Human Siddiqui being back from suspension, and that between the manager speaking then and kickoff, we learn that we lose Lefebvre and Angulo. It seems like 1 step forward and 2 back. But as Martin kind of pointed out there, people talk about the spine of the squad, and of course we're missing Roofs in goal, but Ballard and Alderete are first choice. We've got our first choice trio in the middle of the park. We've got our first choice striker there. Chris Rigg has started games this season, and as Martin said, we'll get into it, but he played very well. Talby has at times been first choice. Hume has been first choice. Gertrude, an international player, comes in at fullback. I mean, on paper, you look at that and people go, we've got lots of injuries. But actually, as I've just gone through it there's a lot of positives to take out of that, and that's the first choice spine and players wide. Okay, you maybe say not the players that Bris would have picked, but still good players who will perform for us this season.
Yeah, and I think that is a fair point, and I think that was sort of reflected in the performance that Sunderland gave for the most part yesterday. There were periods of that game, I'm sort of thinking the sort of 10, 15 minutes before half-time and then the sort of 10 minutes afterwards, where Sunderland were very much on top, should have capitalised and should have had a goal or 2, really put right into the sword, and they obviously didn't. I know, obviously, Chris Rigg had his goal disallowed, which was so disappointing for the lad. But there were times where this looked like the Sunderland side, regardless of the injuries, who were capable of going toe-to-toe with a well-established and sort of very effective Premier League opposition. I think the key and what we saw as the game went on was that, as Martin's alluded to, there just wasn't the depth to then rotate and change things when required, because once you go a goal down, once Brighton sort of start to manage the game as efficiently as they did, you're then in a position where you really are scraping the barrel in terms of what you can do to try and change the game and sort of bring it back to your favour. You know, I know Liza Mayenda came on, but aside from that, realistically, who did Sunderland have? And I think that was reflected in the fact that, you know, the Bris brings on Dennis Serkin for Kemsine Talby in the latter stages because he's just searching for something, anything to try and give Sunderland a little bit of a boost. And ultimately, the only real player who we could rely on in that situation was Serkin. I know he's obviously said that Wilson Isidore perhaps struggling a little bit fitness-wise and therefore wasn't too much of a realistic option. And so I think that it is that depth of squad which is really harming Sunderland at the moment because, like you said yesterday, they're able to put out a really decent 11 and there were some really good performances within that. I think you're right to highlight Chris Rigg. I'm sure we'll talk about him in more detail, but I thought he was really good yesterday and I thought he took his chance excellently. But it's not just the 11 men out on the pitch, it's also the 9 or whatever it is these days that you've got on your bench and who you're able to sort of call upon. And Sunderland just didn't have that. And I think ultimately that was something that really harmed them over the course of the 90 minutes.
Yeah. Well, look, let's get into the game and let's get into those early stages because actually, Martin, I was kind of, again, looking at the kind of tone of my notes early on, first few minutes, Brian Broby being back and then he led from the front in terms of that press. He triggered that press almost straight away and he forced Brighton into a couple of mistakes early on by just charging them down and making sure they knew that they weren't going to get time on the ball. And it's something we've missed, and it's something I don't think Mayenda and Isidore have really got, or maybe got to the levels of Broby. But it's all we had the roar of the crowd at the beginning, the whole build up to the game, which is fantastic. Broby did that first few minutes. We forced Brighton into a couple of mistakes, and then it just seemed to stop after that. I don't know whether he thought I haven't got the support from behind us to do that press or what, but it started off fantastically. Everyone was supporting him. And then it just disappeared after about 5 minutes.
Yeah, it was strange, wasn't it? Because we started off with real intent to kind of close Brighton's defence down, take the game to Brighton. And the opening stage, I thought we were really positive. And, you know, whether it was by accident or by design or by Brighton actually getting a bit of control of the ball, I think it was probably that rather than anything else that we decided to stop doing. But Brighton kind of switched on pretty quickly and were able to nullify that. I do think and again, I think this is something that we need to talk about. Habib Diarra yesterday, I thought he was anonymous. Let's be kind. He was anonymous yesterday. And I look back to that game against Burnley where he had his best game for us, right? And he was getting really close to Brobbey and he was playing off Brobbey and knitting things together and getting beyond him. And he was really buzzing around him and looked full of life. And I think that's what we missed yesterday. We missed that support for Brobbey right around him. And I think that, you know, the more isolated he is, the harder his job is. And I think, you know, again, whether it was Brighton doing something tactically or whether it was us deciding to sit back a little bit after the open stages, we didn't get close enough to Brobbey to actually maximise what he can do. And he's brilliant, like, isn't he? He can hold the ball up. He's a bloody mountain of a fella. And, you know, I think there was a few bits and a few occasions where he probably didn't pick the right pass or wasn't as sharp. Anyway, he's been out for a couple of weeks and you can excuse that. But I just don't think we got close enough to him to really get the most out of that open stage. And, you know, as I said, Brighton, whatever they did, they quickly got hold of that first half, didn't they? And for, 20 or 25 minutes after that, they looked the team on top.
Yeah, just on that, Jason, because we'll mention, mentioned Diarra already, so let's get into it a little bit. But let's bring Xhaka into the equation as well, because the two of those, I feel, looking at the performance, and especially Xhaka in a way, because you looked earlier in the season, and at times he was leading the press, and there was a couple of times he did that, but he certainly wasn't doing it as often as he was in the first half of the season. And for me, it looks like at the moment, Diarra and the likes of Diarra and the likes of Xhaka just haven't got much left in the tank. It just looks like they're playing half fit almost.
I'm tempted to agree a little bit. I think obviously where Xhaka is concerned, he is coming off the back of that ankle injury, and Bris has spoken openly about the need to manage his minutes rather, you know. I think that's obviously why we didn't see him until the real latter stages against Port Vale when it felt like the game was crying out for him to come in and take it by the scruff of the neck. obviously the Bris felt that he was capable of getting through the full 90 yesterday. I do think there were times where he perhaps still looked a little bit leggy. He looked like a player who hadn't played for quite a few weeks. And again, that's no real detriment to him. It's sort of, again, reflective of the fact that Sunderland don't have the options to really rotate at the present moment in time. And so he's happened to play through the full 90 minutes when it might not be ideal for him or the team, you know. I think that one thing that really stood out to me yesterday with the number of times that Sunderland were just sort of left unusually wide open in the middle of the park. There were quite a few times where it felt as if Brighton were able to sort of stride through them with a sort of relative ease. And if we think about the best Sunderland performances that we've seen this season, and especially at the Stadium of Light, that's really uncharacteristic, because one thing that the Bris has really sort of, you know, built in this team is a sense of solidity. And I think as soon as you take that out of the equation, it becomes a real issue. You know, it's a real worry. So I think that you would hope that, because we're talking about things like accumulative fatigue and stuff like that, you would hope that it is almost a short-term thing, and that, you know, once there is an opportunity to rest these players, to sort of give them a little bit of time to work their way back up to full match fitness, or to just take them out of the starting 11, even if it is just for 45 minutes or whatever it might be. You would hope that those things will sort of dissipate as we go on. But certainly in the short term, while Sunderland are battling with all of these injuries, and like I say, with such a big game coming up next weekend, I do think it is something that the Bris will probably be a little bit concerned about at the present moment in time.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, when you look at, you know, that notion of Xhaka leading the press, right? Because at the very start of the season, when we started off with that three with Xhaka, Siddiqui and Diarra, Xhaka was sitting and Siddiqui and Diarra were pushing up, weren't they? And Xhaka only started pressing once Diarra had come out of the team and went to a five. And I remember the first game that was really noticeable was that Chelsea away game, when we went to a back five, and then he had an extra man behind him so he could go and press. And then during AFCON, you know, whether it was Gertrude or whoever else was alongside him in midfield, there was more defensive solidity there. So it was actually really unusual in the formation and with the personnel that we had yesterday to see Xhaka going and trying to lead that press. And I thought, watching it, that that's a direct result of, you know, this conversation apparently that the Bris has had with the coach and staff and Xhaka this week about how we get more goals out of them. And I think he was trying to lead from the front. I think he was trying to press. And, you know, we saw him drive forward with the ball an awful lot. There was one point in the first half where he drove forward and he actually should have shot, and he tried to play out to Talby. And I thought that was a direct result of Xhaka trying to lead a more attacking sort of bit of the team and trying to be more influential going forward. And I actually think he wore himself out, because after an hour he looked knackered, and he wasn't actually doing that as much in the second half. So I actually think that was him trying to take more responsibility and have more responsibility for the attacking performance rather than more responsibility per se. But I think that was a consequence of that, because as I say, we don't normally see him pressing as high in that three that he was in yesterday.
Yeah. Well, I mean, early on, looking at about 10 minutes gone, Brighton had a fantastic chance. You're talking about us being open, Jason, and we were on this occasion. It went out to their left-hand side. They got the ball in. Hinchelwood from a few yards out, the ball was crossed in, and Elborg was going the wrong way and managed to get his foot on it. And I thought it was an absolutely fantastic save. But it's worth just taking the chance at that point, just to get your thoughts on Elborg, because young lad coming into the Premier League probably wasn't expecting it, because Roofs had been so fit. He looked like he was invincible in terms of kind of fitness. And, you know, he just joins the club thrown into the deep end in the Premier League. But he looks a good prospect, doesn't he?
He really does. He really does. He looks like another good find. I think that, like you sort of alluded to, circumstances are probably not ideal, you know. But that being said, you think about his debut, he's come in, he's kept a clean sheet at Elland Road in really sort of difficult environment and fiery circumstances, if you like. Obviously, Port Vale, a couple of moments that you could perhaps classify as a little bit shaky, but I thought for the most part, he did very well. I don't think the goal was in any way, shape or form his fault. Rather. I think yesterday, like you said, there were some real moments where you thought, okay, this guy's got it. Like, his shot stopping is not in question. He's obviously got huge amounts of potential. The goal, as I'm sure we'll discuss, didn't exactly cover himself in glory for it. And I do think that, if I'm being completely frank about it, his distribution is not quite at Roof's level yet. There are still moments where it feels as if, they're heart and mouth moments, if we're being completely honest about it. I think that hopefully will come as he adapts to the sort of pace of the Premier League, and understanding that actually you sometimes just need to play at that split second sooner, rather than getting closed down, rather than drawing your man in as much as he does. But certainly on the evidence of what we've seen so far, I think that there are plenty of reasons to be very optimistic about him, and also plenty of reasons to believe that, on those occasions where Roofs isn't available, he is absolutely a worthwhile deputy to him. I would like to think that, Roofs will be back and available for next weekend. Certainly that seems to be the hope around the club as well. The way that Bris is talking, it sounds as if Roofs is hopefully going to at least be in contention. But certainly in the short term, I think Elborg does deserve to be praised for what he's produced so far.
Yeah, it's going to be the walking wounded next week by the looks of it at this rate. But Martin, a couple of minutes later, I think you might have already mentioned it, but we had that fantastic chance where it was across from the right, and Broby making a nuisance of himself in the middle and flicked it, and Talby was behind him, half volley, and I think he couldn't have hit it any better, and it ended up, I think, Dunk cleared it off the line. But generally after that, I'm looking at the first half an hour, and Brighton had 67% possession. But other than that chance, we allowed Brighton to just completely take control of the game in those early stages.
They had all the possession, didn't they, in terms of anything meaningful. And, as Jason said earlier, we were so wide open. They seemed to cut through us at will. But that left space for us to go and attack as well. And, that was a good chance. I think that was one of those where you look at those two chances for both sides. The Hinchelwood one, I think he'll be kicking. It was a good save, great save. I think he'll be kicking himself because he should have made more of that chance. He should have, it was a great opportunity. The Talby one, I don't think he could have hit any better from the situation he was in, and it was just good defending from Dunks. I don't think you can attribute any blame to Talby for that. I think he did everything he possibly could. He caught it well, and I think it was noticeable that there was more of a willingness throughout the game for us to have a bit of a dig and try to have a shot and try to get an effort on target. We saw a few more efforts from outside the box that we haven't seen recently, and Talby was able to take that opportunity to shoot. And look, it was good defending, wasn't it? It was in the right place at the right time, and it was one of those. But it was a good opportunity that we carved out, and I think that was our first real meaningful attempt on goal, wasn't it?
Mm. Yeah, and well, that's it. And after about half an hour, Jason, that those possession stats came up, and like I said, almost 70% possession for Brighton at the Stadium of Light, and we're playing at home, and you could really hear the crowd being frustrated when Brighton were keeping the ball, and there was absolutely no pressure on them, and they had all the possession, and it just looked like we sat back almost. We dropped 20 yards for some reason. But in the last 15 minutes of the first half, and it might have been in a reaction to the crowd, or Xhaka might have said something. You've got to give the players credit that actually they flipped the game around for the last 15 minutes of the second half, and it almost started with that drive from Xhaka where it was played wide to Talby, and we maybe should have made more of it. But you've got to give credit to the players that they turned it around.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Like I sort of said at the beginning, I thought that for that period either side of the interval, I thought Sunderland were brilliant for the most part. The only criticism you would have is that they didn't put the ball in the back of the net, and I think that for me kind of makes the result almost more frustrating than if they just play crap for the full 90 minutes. Because when you've got those opportunities in the Premier League, when you have those periods of sort of relative dominance, you've got to make good on them. And we just didn't see that from Sunderland yesterday. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And, it does show that this Sunderland side, again, we've said it a few times, but they are capable of causing problems. It's just a case of getting all those pieces to click into place for them. And when it does, they're more than capable of going at sides and really sort of putting them under the cosh. But yesterday, like I say, it just, for whatever reason, it didn't happen for them. And ultimately, when you're not able to get that goal, especially on home soil, because we know how good Sunderland are at, sort of edging the way in front and then ultimately just like shutting up shop and being that solid unit that they were earlier in the season. If they're not able to get themselves in front, then at a certain point in the Premier League, you've got to expect a team to sort of lash back at you, and that's ultimately what happened yesterday.
Yeah. And well, just before we leave the first half behind, Martin, I just wanted to mention this because, well, there was a couple of things obviously leading up to it. I thought we were really positive. There was a couple of good half chances. That there was an overhead kick from Chris Rigg, which was fantastic. And then Getrauda had a really good drive forward, and he had a shot saved. The other incident, which I thought was the the biggest contribution that Diarra made the whole afternoon, was there was a tussle in midfield, and this is what you want to see more of him do. But there was a tussle in midfield, and he basically just kneed Gross right between the legs, which was missed by, I don't know if you caught this on the replay, but it was missed by kind of VAR, or they saw it and thought, can we really pull him on that? And they decided not to make anything of it because they were together, and if you look, he properly kneed him between the legs.
Yeah, no, I did spot that, and I did wonder whether or not VAR would get involved there, because he did give him a hefty whack to the bollocks, didn't he? But it was one of those, when you look at it, right, you consider, if he doesn't go down, do they look at that at all? And my answer to that would be no, because it was a bit of a tussle. It was kind of a brush off. And the lad had committed the foul on Diarra, hadn't he, when he tried to turn him in midfield. But it's one of those that, like another day with somebody else looking at it, you could talk the referee into taking some action, I think. But again, you just look at the reaction and go, if he hasn't gone rolling around, do you even look at it? And my answer to that would be no.
Yeah, and holding the area of his body. I think maybe the VAR, they were just having a laugh basically at it. But the point I was trying to make though about Diarra though, Martin, was that actually you almost want him to do that. You wanted him yesterday to have that bit fire where he was going around being a nuisance.
Well, you do, and look, I think this is a whole conversation about Diarra, isn't it? Because he looked kind of almost caught in two minds a lot of the time. He didn't necessarily know where he needed to be, whether he should be right up front trying to support Broby, whether he should be dropping deep trying to pick the ball up and trying to create things and help things and move things on. And he's suffered, hasn't he? Because he was injured so early on. He hasn't had that time to build up the relationships with the other players on the field, the connections and all that sort of stuff. So I think he's finding it tough. And look, also, he's come back from a long-term injury, straight to AFCON, played a lot of football, come back into the Premier League, playing a lot of football, and that's going to catch up on you at some point as well, isn't it? I think it's interesting, the point that you made about the way we reacted and the way that the crowd seemed to react to Brighton having a lot of possession, because if that was Man City or if that was Arsenal having that amount of possession, does the crowd react like that? And I would say absolutely not. And I don't know whether it's the expectation that we should be actually going out and dominating possession in these sort of games and not letting teams have the ball as much. The expectation that we should be going and winning like a game like this, like a game against Fulham. And the reality is, Brighton have been in the Premier League for the last 10 years. They've got a very good squad of players, and they're not going to be an easy team to beat. And we're going to have to have a really good game to get a win out of them. So I don't know if we, again, taking a step back and going, let's just have a moment to reflect on where we are and what we've done so far this season. Because I don't think we can expect to turn up to the Stadium Light and turn teams over that aren't in the top 4 or 5. And I kind of think there's an expectation about that. It was interesting as well, Bris had said after 25 minutes, so they clicked on to what Brighton were doing, and we were able to change our press to then nullify what they were doing, and then that gave us more possession, gave us more opportunities to get forward. And again, as I say, Getrauda had that shot, and we seemed more willing to take a punt and take a chance of getting an effort on goal. And again, that was half time. You kind of going, well, that we could have been 1-0 down, we could have been 2-0 down, but also we could have been 1 or 2-0 up if things had fallen right. And I think it was just a very even game in that first half. We'd nullified that threat. But, earlier in the season, we went a goal down a few times, didn't we, at home? And the crowd got so behind the team and pushed the team forward to get that equaliser. And, against Bournemouth, we got the winner as well. And I don't know what's not happening, what's not quite right in that, but it seemed after Brighton had that spell of possession, it was almost like being back in League One of the Championship, where a team's having that sort of possession at home, and you go, oh shit, we're not going to get anything. And I don't know if this recent run of results has kind of eroded some confidence or some belief, but it just seemed like we've gone back a year rather than looking at what we did earlier on in the season.
Yeah. Well, it did go into the break goalless, and while you all might still think it was all a dream and we actually won the game, I think that's a good point for us to take a quick break. So we'll be back very soon.
This episode is brought to you by Cologuard. Do you know what's really scary? Not screening for colon cancer when you turn 45. The Cologuard test is non-invasive, requires no special prep or time off work, and ships right to your door. In just 3 simple steps, Cologuard takes the scare out of colon cancer screening. If you're 45 or older and at average risk, ask your healthcare provider about the Cologuard test. Cologuard is available by prescription only. Learn more or request a prescription today at Cologuard.com/screen.
You walk in tired and hungry, one bad dinner away from losing it. You don't like to cook. You don't want more takeout. You just want something good. That's why there's Dish by Blue Apron. Pre-made meals with at least 20 grams of protein and no artificial flavors or colors. From fridge to fork in 5 minutes or less. Keep the flavor. Ditch the subscription. Get 20% off your first 2 orders with code APRON20. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
Head to Whole Foods Market for savings on zesty flavors. It's the Cocina Latina event with yellow sales signs throughout the store. Check out the meat department for marinated skirt steak with no antibiotics ever, and explore delicious weeknight shortcuts with a variety of 365 brand simmer sauces, rice and beans at wallet-happy prices. Liven things up in produce with fresh salsa and guacamole. Save during the Cocina Latina event at Whole Foods Market.
And welcome back to How We're the podcast. And we're going to get into the second half, Jason, because actually I thought Sunderland came out the blocks. We started the second half as we finished the first half. We were on top. And just a few minutes into that second half, we all thought we'd taken the lead. And in a game like that, it's almost, when you used to play first goal the winner, it's almost like that's how you felt this game was going to play out. And eventually it did. And you thought this was it. Ball in from Hume. Alderete headed it. From an offside position, as we found out later, but it did fall to Chris Rigg. But what a finish, by the way, because from that tight angle, you thought, what's he going to do? Is he going to play the ball back across the box? But from that angle, he managed to get the power on it to beat the keeper. But fantastic goal, and we all thought he'd get his first Premier League goal.
He did. I mean, how unbelievably cruel for the lad, by the way, because, his reaction was just brilliant, wasn't it? You could tell that it meant the world to him. And as we've sort of said, I actually thought it was, just rewards for a really positive performance. He came into the side. I thought he looked more robust than we've seen him look in the Premier League so far. I thought he put himself about really well. I thought we saw a version of Chris Rigg that was much closer to that sort of technically astute and creative player that we became so accustomed to in the Championship. I thought he really made a decent impression on the game in the first half. And like you say, his finish was really well taken. Again, kind of what we became accustomed to in the Championship last season. To then see it chalked off is just such a deflating moment, and you do feel for the lad. But in terms of where Sunderland were at in the contest at that point, I thought that, they were deserving of that goal. I thought that they were much the better team. They were well on top. And it wasn't just the Chris Rigg chance either. There were several times where they sort of either dispossessed Brighton in their defensive third, or they, played their way through, and it felt as if they were in a prime position to go and take a lead. And like I say, ultimately it never happened for them. But as far as Rigg is concerned, like I said, really tough moment for him to have that goal chalked off. But hopefully, it gives him a platform to sort of kick on and really stake a claim for being a more frequent member of Le Bris's start 11 going forward.
Yeah, he's definitely going to be looking for more minutes. But Martin, just on this goal, when you saw Alderete headed it, you thought nothing of it because he'd ran 5 yards to come back from his position that he was in, where he was offside, to head the ball where he ended up being almost 10 yards onside when he made contact, I think. But, which way do you look at this? Do you give credit to Brighton to say, well, they held a fantastic line and pushed out? Or do you say this is a really dumb kind of position to be in to be offside? Because it was almost kind of 25, 30 yards out from goal.
I think it's a bit both, isn't it? I think you've got to give credit to Brighton for holding the line well. But if you're up there for a free kick that obviously we had from the right-hand side that Hume took, he's got a great view across the line, and he's got to make sure he's onside when the ball comes in, because otherwise everything else is pointless as it transpired. But, as I say, by the time he actually headed the ball, he was 5 yards onside. Whoever, I think it was Broby, wasn't it, got a touch to Rigg, and brilliant finish. And I think Chris Rigg was superb. I think we've all talked about it a little bit, haven't we? But I just think he looked really sharp as well. As Jason said, he looked a bit more robust. And I just think he looked sharp, and he wanted to make an impression. He looked like the kid who we saw play last season, the season before, where it was almost like he had no fear and he just wanted to go out and make an impression. And I actually thought as the game wore on, I wanted to see him more in the middle. I would have swapped him and Diarra around and just said, look, get on the ball and try to make something happen, because he was getting the ball in tight situations. He was linking up play. He was going past people. He was getting onto his left foot and pinging balls across. And I just thought he looked like our best opportunity to create something in that second half, because he was just getting on the ball and he looked in such good form. And it's really good to see, because I think he struggled a little bit in that spell over Christmas where he got brought in for a few games and games passed him by a little bit. He was trying to do a lot of hard work, and you can never fault his work rate, but he just didn't get in the ball enough to do things. I thought yesterday was different. I thought he got in the ball a lot. He demanded the ball, and that augurs really well for the future. And, if you're looking at the run-in that we've got, obviously after this coming weekend's game, I think we've got 3 weeks off, haven't we, before our next league game. So it gives a chance for people to have a rest and get some players back to fitness. But I'm really keen to see Rigg play more games, get more minutes in this run-in, because I think, the club will also want to give him some time on the field, won't they? Because I think he can be a really important player for us over the next 2 or 3 years in the Premier League. And you just want to give him a bit of exposure to football. And, he's done his case no harm. I tell you what, for next Sunday, he's put himself in prime position to start, regardless whoever else is fit. He's, that was his audition for playing against Newcastle. He passed it with flying colours.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the lineup for that game. Well, depends on who's fit as well, of course. But Jason, just that first, because Brighton took the lead eventually, just before the hour. But up until then, as we've said, that first 10, 15 minutes of the second half, Sunderland really pinned Brighton in, and we've done this a few times where we've had the likes of Xhaka and Ballard, sitting almost halfway inside the opponent's half, and we just pin them in. We keep possession. We keep the ball recycled. We keep it going wide and then coming back and trying to find positions. You said it earlier on where you said we got into those prime positions. It wasn't just that goal that we ruled out. There was that one where Xhaka put Diarra in a great position and then Diarra sliced it out for a goal kick. That was a half chance. But again, like you said, getting into really good positions. But the sad part of it is during that time when we were really on top, we didn't really create a chance. There wasn't a golden chance. There wasn't that, we missed that one. We didn't really create anything despite the amount we were on top.
No, you're right. I mean, I'm also thinking about that sort of wild Brian Brobby effort that was lashed over the crossbar. Yeah. I mean, from there, you've got to be working the goalkeeper.
He had loads of options as well, didn't he?
He did.
He did. Well, I think it was Siddiqui was on, wasn't he? He was sort of 5-10 yard pass. He could just laid him in. But I mean, by the way, I completely understand why, as a centre forward, especially one who has scored a fair few goals, or decent goals already this season. I understand why Brian Brobby's gone for goal there. But if you're going to go for it, you've got to hit the target. You've simply got to hit the target from there. So yeah, you're right. It is one of those where, on the one hand, you're looking at it and you're going, yeah, really positive and encouraging to see Sunderland put a team under pressure and work the ball quite nicely. But there is still maybe a suspicion that they are lacking a little bit of a clinical edge. Maybe not quite producing the quality in certain moments that they need to. And I think, look, that's reflected in the fact that they are one of the lower scoring sides in the division so far. I think it's we've already mentioned again Bris's comments this past week. It's something that they're clearly aware of. It's something that they'll be really keen to work on. Right? I suspect it's something that they will really look to try and amend over the course of the summer as well. They've built such a solid base at the back and through the spine of the team. You would imagine that the next sort of priority on the list would be to bring in a couple more players who are capable of really making good on that platform and putting the ball in the back of the net. I think yesterday was a game that would have been really well suited to an Enzo affair. Someone who is capable of making things happen in tight situations, who's capable of sort of drifting in field and being that extra body who can just, cause Brighton another problem. Really damaging not to have him in there as well. Again, we talk about the openness in midfield. I don't think it's any real coincidence that happens while Levere's sidelined as well, because he's so important to this team in terms of his defensive work rate as well and what he brings sort of going the other way. So having him out was a real big miss for Sunderland. But like you said, the fact that they're getting into these positions is promising. The fact that they're not making good on them continues to be a little bit of a concern. And I think that, Bris will probably be scratching his head and pondering all week long how he makes a change in that regard.
Yeah. Well, look, the goal did come. I've been trying to avoid it, Martin, but around 57 minutes it did come, and let's pull it apart a bit because it came from a corner. And you could see clearly because actually the camera went on Dunk and Diarra in the box, and Dunk pushed Diarra over. Diarra kind of sat up and then went back down holding his face. It was half cleared. It went back wide, and it was Minte who beat Xhaka. And then the most bizarre kick, he seemed to try and pull it back or kind of, chip it to the back post or something, and kind of scuffed it. And the ball went past. I think there was a Brighton defender who was in front of Elborg at the near post, and it managed it. I don't think Elborg even knew it had gone past him until he heard the noise from above from the Brighton fans and turned around. The ball was in the net. It was so weird, but such a strange goal. But it kind of summed up the game, didn't it?
Oh, look, there's so many mistakes in this goal. So many mistakes. So the corner came from Hume's back pass, first of all. So it's a really, needless error that we've given away a corner, a really sloppy ball from Trey Hume back to the goalkeeper, first of all, to give Brighton the corner. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two, every single time that sort of thing happens in the box, the referee will blow. The referee was watching it, and he would blow before the corner's taken. Now, that doesn't change what happens with the corner, but that every single time the referee would normally blow for a shove, because that was a shove. Dunk shoved Diarra down with two hands, and and we'll go into what happened next, but the game should have been stopped then, and the corner should have been stopped and sorted back out and retaken. Diarra is then pathetic. I'm sorry to give the lad stick, but that is disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. The fact that he stayed down all the way through that move was a disgrace. And he ended up playing them on side for part of it. And, I just have no time for that sort of behaviour at all. If you've gone down, you've got to get back up, because if VAR is going to pick something up, if the referee's going to pick something up, they'll pick it up. You staying down is not going to change what happens then. It's not going to change what happens then. So you've got that bit, and that makes me absolutely furious. And Bris was really guarded in his comments after the game, but he said something similar where you've got to get up and just play on with the game. And they will be furious with Diarra because that was horrendous, right? You got that bit to us. That was a mistake. Xhaka's clearance from the corner was poor. He scuffed his clearance out. He did not connect with his clearance at all. That gets straight back to Brighton, go back. I think Xhaka could probably do a little bit better showing the lad down the line. I think the lad got round him a little bit too easy.
He got done, didn't he? Basically.
He did get done. And then Elborg, like I listened to Gav and Sam and some of the other folk on the pubcast after the game, and they said that no blame attached to Elborg. I think Elborg gets completely lost in terms of where his near post is. I think he thinks he's on his near post, which is why he looks around so surprised when the ball's going net, because he's lost where he is on the pitch. I think he thinks his near post's right next to him and he's 2 yards out of his goal. So the ball comes in really straight, and it's a bizarre goal. But I think it's just a catalogue of mistakes from us and from the referee. And I'm not saying the goal should be disallowed. It absolutely should not be disallowed. Once he's let that play go on and the corner be taken, I've got no issue at all with any of it from a referee's point of view. But you made a mistake, Xhaka made a mistake, Diarra's made a mistake, Elborg's made a mistake, and that is completely down to us, that goal. The finish is lucky. He doesn't mean to shoot, he sort of scuffs it in, doesn't he? But that's the luck you get sometimes. But I just thought we were atrocious all over for that goal.
Yeah.
I'm really happy with it, as you can tell.
Yeah, well, I would say that the goal was fresh, but I don't think Minty meant it. I'm sure that works.
All right, Kelvin.
Answers on a postcard, but yeah, Jason. Look, Martin's tried to pull it all apart there, and he did mention Diarra, and I do think I look back at Siddiqui at the start of the season, and Siddiqui kind of had quite a lot of these traits that I think have been kind of knocked out of him as the season's gone on, because he's played more games than Diarra. He obviously wasn't out injured. And I think now Siddiqui is at a point where he's maybe stopped doing some of those antics where he was at the beginning of the season. Diarra hasn't played as many games, and maybe he's still got some of that in his game that, we haven't really told him, you've got to, that happens, you don't get it straight away, you get back up. But as Martin said, there was a lot more that went into the goal. So what did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, where Diarra is concerned, again, I'm not digging the lad out, but I do think it's borderline inexcusable. He's got to get up. It felt to me like he's trying to referee the game himself. He feels aggrieved. He's gone down. The other thing to note as well is that I'm pretty sure it looks on the replay as if he sort of caught at the back of his head on Van Hecke's knee or something as he's gone down. And I think that he's then felt that because it's potentially a head thing, he's capable of, or he's able to sort of stay down, and the referee will eventually call it up. When that doesn't happen, it's one of those where, what do? You kind of got to keep lying there to save face, haven't you? And then by the time you get up, the ball's in the back of the net, So I think from his point of view, it's incredibly soft. I think even the initial contact from Dung, probably not enough to warrant him to go down in the way that he does. So in that regard, I think that Sunderland only really had themselves to blame. The rest of it, as Martin sort of said, is, I mean, I hesitate to say a comedy of errors because we're not exactly laughing about it, are we? But it's one error after another. Where Elborg is concerned, I have a slight bit of sympathy for him because he is very much unsighted by Van Hecke. Which, by the way, was another thing that I've watched it a few times back, and I can't really decide if he's onside, offside, if the ball goes forward, if it goes sideways, if it should be checked, if it shouldn't be checked. It all feels a little bit suspect, and I'm not saying it should have been ruled out by any means, but I'm surprised that it wasn't at least mentioned that there might be a potential check for the offside. So anyway, you move past that, and then I do think.
Sorry, Jason, just quickly, because I actually froze it this morning on the highlights to try and see if it was offside. And the bizarre thing, because Xhaka is slowly moving out of play, and I almost think if he moves out of play quicker, it might be offside, because at the point, you've got the question is he in line with the ball? And then Roofs and Xhaka kind of overlap, but then is that defender's arm maybe one side of Elborg, which would mean he's offside because Xhaka's the last man. But it's bizarre that I haven't seen any evidence that it was onside.
No, I mean, me neither. But at the same time, I guess the flip side of that is that they are so forensic about these, especially where offsides are concerned. That seems to be one thing that they are so forensic about, that somebody somewhere has evidently seen something that we're not privy to suggest that the goal should have stood. I mean, that being said, it's not as if they are beyond making a mistake when it comes to an offside either. It should be noted. But clearly they felt that it was okay. So, and then, like I say, where Elborg's concerned, he is unsighted, so I have a little bit of sympathy in that regard. But at the same time, I completely echo what Martin's saying. I think that he has maybe just, got himself a little bit dumbfounded in terms of where he should be. I think his positioning ideally should be tight to that near post. I think he's, as to be fair, everybody on the pitch was expecting the ball to come across, isn't he? I think even Minter himself was expecting the ball to go across, and I think he's maybe gambled on that a little bit, lost his near post, and then in the sort of hubbub that ensues, the ball ends up in the back of the net and we're all left wondering how the hell it's happened. So, yeah, really frustrating goal for Sunderland to concede, and one that I think on reflection was just entirely preventable, but preventable in about 3 different ways, which makes it triply frustrating.
Yeah, that's it. But we did go behind, and like I said, it did feel like everyone just kind of dropped, because it did feel like that sort of game where it would be first goal the winner. But not long after that, Ballard had to come off injured, and 09 came on, and so Ballard is a worry for the Newcastle game. I think the Bris was a bit guarded about that after the game, because obviously with the Newcastle one coming up, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But then after that, Martin, we were talking about a reaction to, the Port Vale game, and we were talking about a reaction from the players. We go behind, you think, right, let's get a reaction to this goal. I can't say it really came, but did you see a reaction from the players?
No, I didn't see a reaction at all. And, whether it is disappointing to not see the reaction, but I think there are mitigating circumstances for that. That we've already talked about the injuries that we've got, and it's not making an excuse for it, because I think we tried. I don't think this was a game where, you can fault effort. I don't think it's a game where you can fault a desire to do something creative. I just thought we lacked options. And, obviously we brought Mayenda on to try to freshen things up, but that was the only option that we had on the bench to actually try to do something different, to try to change something. And, I think if you look back at that Port Vale game, and Gav and I talked with Tom White last Sunday about the lack of subs that we made in that game. Now, you can understand it to some extent, but if you chucked on a couple of the lads who were on the bench last weekend, right? We had Abdullahi and Garagusi on the bench. Yes, young lads, yes, completely inexperienced, right? But there's something different, a different goal threat. And if you chuck them on against Port Vale and they've done all right, then you may be more inclined to have them on the bench and bring them off the bench in the game against Brighton as an option, because we are down to the bare bones in terms of options from the bench. And we just didn't have anybody. He said Isidore wasn't fit enough to bring off the bench. Well, why have him on the bench? Like, that does not make any sense to me whatsoever. I completely understand if somebody's not fit enough to play 90 minutes, given that we've got so many subs, have somebody on the bench and come on and do 20 minutes and create something. To have a player on the bench who is not physically capable of coming off the bench is illogical. Like, quite simply, it's illogical. So that's just baffling. Like, absolutely baffling. I understood bringing Sirkin on, because I actually thought if Sirkin had an hour in him, he should have started, because he gives us that natural balance on the left. And if we've got somebody like Talby playing along up front ahead of him, Sirkin with his left foot can overlap, get into wide areas, get crosses in. Hume's a lot better going forward than Getrauder is from right back. And I just saw, even if Sirkin can play an hour, he should start, because it gives us a balance and gives us the overlapping fullbacks. And I could see the logic of bringing Sirkin on, because he can get a cross in, and I think Talby in flashes did well, but there was a number of times he could have got the ball in quicker into the box, and he failed to do so. And I thought that was just the last throw of the dice. Let's see if Sirkin can whip a cross in and create something. Obviously, it didn't quite work out as he might have wanted it to. But there wasn't, as I say, there wasn't a response as such. And I don't think we really threatened their goal to any meaningful level, did we? But you can kind of understand why there wasn't, because we just didn't have the personnel to change things up.
Yeah. Well, how did you see that, Jason? Because look, we go behind at home, and we've seen in previous games this season when we've gone behind. I mean, I think at one point we were top of the charts in terms of winning points from losing positions, especially at home. And you look at how we might change the game, and you look you look at the bench on paper, the bench was keeping up with the Joneses basically because there was kind of three of them on the bench. But as Martin said, you've got those three, you've got Whittaker, you've got Isidore. So you're saying that maybe from your bench, and let's rule out Moore as well. So you've got 4, 5, 6 players on the bench that you're essentially saying you're not going to use. I mean, is that an indictment of the depth we've got, or is that an indictment of who he puts on the bench and saying, well, I'm not going to use those, or is there some young players there that we say, look, he might change a game? Because I mean, look, we've got nobody in that bracket, but if you look at Arsenal sticking a 16-year-old lad on the pitch who's got a bit of energy and changed the game against Everton. So what does that say?
I mean, I think more than anything, it's really a reflection of just how beleaguered Sunderland are in terms of their injury issues at the moment, because his hand is being forced in terms of his match day squads, Even if you think, Enzo Lafayette and Nilson Angulo, we would assume that one or both of those would have started yesterday if they were fit. That then gives you 2 other players, 2 other options, whether it's one of those 2, whether it's somebody who's in the starting 11, who can come off the bench and make a difference. So it's just an accumulation of all of these injuries building up one on top of the other. In terms of throwing in one of the young lads, by now we're fully aware of how measured, how sort of sensible the Bris is about these things. He's not prone to a sudden roll of the dice with an untested player, and I think more than anything, it's because he wants to protect those players. He doesn't want to put them in situations that he doesn't feel they are 100% ready to cope with. And I think that's commendable in its own way. The unfortunate reality is that right now Sunderland they're just short of options. And sometimes it's purely a numerical thing. They just don't have the bodies to be able to make the changes that Bris would ideally like to make. You would hope that as the season progresses, we're very much in the last stages now, but, players like Nodi Mukiele coming back, that then gives you an extra body in terms of whether it's a Geertruida who's so versatile, even if Serkin's, like Martin says, fit enough to play 60 minutes going forward, okay, well, that gives you somebody else in a wide position potentially who can, sit on the bench, come on and make a difference. So it's all just a case of getting these players back to fitness to then sort of provide like a boost from within, if you like, because I think that where Bris is at, it's far from ideal for him. And unfortunately, as impressive as the likes of Giragusian and Abdullahi look for the 21s, the 18s, whoever they might be playing for, I just don't foresee a situation where Bris goes, you know what, get on there, have half an hour and see what he can do, because I don't think he's that sort of head coach.
Yeah. Well, talking about freshening things up, I just want to go back to Minte for a second, because Martin, with about 15 minutes left, there was an incident with Luke O'Nien where he pushed him on the sidelines, 2 hands, and then got a yellow card, then fouled Chris Rigg a minute later, no yellow card, and Xhaka got booked in the kind of discussion that happened afterwards because he was asking for a second yellow, and then Brighton brought him off literally like seconds later. So what did you make of all that? Could we have been facing a kind of 10-man Brighton for the last 15 minutes?
I think on another day we possibly could. I think it's one of those, I don't think the referee necessarily got it wrong, but a different referee might have given something different. I think I always like to put like reverse situation, and if that was one of our players pushing a Brighton player, would you expect a red or a yellow? Well, I'd probably expect a yellow 9 times out of 10. So I think that was the right outcome for that. I think the foul is rather cynical. It stops a good attacking move. And again, if that was one of our players, would I expect a yellow card? Probably 50-50. And I think the fact that he just booked him stops him from giving him another yellow card, which is completely incorrect. And this is one of my things for when we do Room 101, Chris, next time that we do on
You're
my...
itching to do that, aren't you?
Oh, I shared my list of about 20 things the other day. But that thing where it's like referees judging an offence based on what's gone on before. And I think if that's a yellow card and that's a free kick, then it is regardless of what's gone on before, regardless of where it happens. So I think he could count himself lucky to stay on the field. I think again, the foul was probably a 50-50 whether it's a yellow card or not. And obviously Brighton were very aware of that because they subbed him off pretty much immediately after that, didn't they?
Yeah, that's it. And look, those closing stages, Jason, I was wearing my supposedly lucky till the end socks. You go back to early in the season and the lads never gave up. And the last 10 minutes, we always made, if we needed a goal, it was always, we pinned them in, balls into the box, corners, whatever, creating pressure. It just didn't come. And have we maybe lost that edge, do you think, when it comes to situations like this? Because you're talking about, I think we made that substitution with around 10 minutes left in terms of Serkin coming on for Talby. A lot of people were leaving the stands. A lot of people just went, right, well, that's it. I've had enough. I'm going home. Would that have happened a few months ago? And Martin mentioned the opposition. Was it because we were playing Brighton and people were frustrated that we weren't just rolling them over and getting the 3 points and being 2 up with 10 minutes left? I mean, has something changed?
So it's so hard to say, isn't it? It's really difficult. I think yesterday it felt like the mood was a bit different. If we compare it to the 2-2 draw with Arsenal, where it felt as if someone really had the bit between the teeth and were desperately trying to get a sort of shock result. This sort of felt like the belief went early. And I think that was probably because the performance didn't exactly inspire a lot of belief, if we're being completely honest. I felt like Sunderland looked as if they were petering out early doors in this one. They weren't, as you said, they weren't creating an awful lot. Felt like there was a lot of reliance on that Luke O'Nien long throw and just sort of lumping it in there and hoping that you could get the second contact. So yeah, in that regard, it was difficult, wasn't it? And you can't sort of synthesize that belief. If people have season tickets, people watch the games, people know football, they can sort of feel when a side aren't exactly, battering down the door, and Sunderland weren't doing that yesterday. And the other thing to point out was that as good as Sunderland have been with regards to late goals and sort of, taking points from losing positions and all that sort of stuff, it's not going to happen every single time. And yesterday, it was just one of those where they never really looked as if they were going to do it. I also think it should be pointed out that Brighton did a really good job of managing the game. I think they showed their Premier League experience. They got ahead. They found ways of frustrating Sunderland. And I think the two in combination, Sunderland's sort of relative bluntness and Brighton's ability to just keep them at arm's length, it's sort of perfect storm, really, wasn't it? Where Sunderland never really looked as if they were going to do anything. Again, then you bring in the fact that they weren't able to really bring on anybody who can make a real difference and sort of give them that kickstart. Doesn't help matters either. But all in all, I think it's, where we're at in the season, the fact that Sunderland aren't necessarily chasing anything too obvious anymore, Saturday 3:00 kickoff, all those things, it just kind of felt like it was a hiding to nothing at times yesterday.
Yeah, only one of 2 3:00 kickoffs. I'll just put it out there, which I put in the preview. But anyway, I'll leave that there. Martin, try and put this into perspective for us, because I know you're quite big on kind of points per game and things like that. But in terms of the feeling around the club, if you look at the first 20 games, we lost 4 games, and there was a lot of draws in there, but we lost 4 games. We've lost 6 out of the last 10, but we've got 3 wins in there. So how should we put this into perspective and look at this run of the last 10 games? Like I said, losing more games in the last 10 than we lost in the 20 games before that.
Oh, look, I think it's so difficult, isn't it? Because there's so many factors to it. And, that run that we had at the start of the season, we had a pretty much fully fit squad, bar Diarra. So you've got all of these different factors to weigh up. And again, you go back to after the Fulham game, right? You're looking forward to league games against Bournemouth away, Leeds away, and Brighton at home. And if you'd said, would you be happy with 4 points out of those 3 games? We would probably have said yes. I think that we would have thought 4 points out of those 3 games would have been a decent return with the injuries that we had. Now, look, nobody likes getting beat. And I think the biggest thing with the game yesterday was that after the Port Vale game, we were expecting a reaction. We were expecting a performance to allay what went wrong last Saturday, to put right what went wrong last Saturday. Because last Saturday, I thought the attitude and application weren't there. I thought we just turned up and didn't want to really compete. And I think the feeling was that the players would want to atone for that against Brighton and put on a show. And it's obviously a lot easier said than done, especially at Premier League level, to be able to do that, isn't it? But that might explain why the crowd were a little bit more edgy. And, as Jason said, you can't manufacture that feeling. It's either there or not. And it all works together. The players' performance on the pitch, what's going on in the stand, all that sort of stuff. So I think we've got to caveat this run with the injuries that we've got. And I know people won't like to hear that, and people think we should be playing brilliant football every week and everything should be perfect. The reality of football isn't like that. And for a team like ours, a squad like ours, to lose the quality that we've lost over the past few weeks, and the players like Xhaka who are playing evidently half fit, I think we've just got to give a little bit of leeway to the team, the performances, to Bris, because we've achieved. Well, I say we've achieved. I'm one of those people who will not say that we're safe from relegation until it's mathematically impossible not to go down. But all intents and purposes, we've achieved what we want to this season. We've hit 40 points early in March, and I think we just need to take a beat and be really mindful of what's gone on and what's happening right now with the players' fitness, with again, people playing with injuries, all that sort of stuff. Yes, there's things that weren't quite right yesterday. Yes, there's a lot of things we could have done better. But I think you see somebody like Rig coming back on the team, putting in the performance he did. These players can get better and grow with experience. And without wanting to echo completely what Bris has said, he said these are really important things for these players to go through. This adversity is going to make them better. Defeats are going to make them better because they'll learn more in a defeat like that than they will. And look, that's all well and good for a manager to say, right? But as fans, we want to see the team play well, score goals and win. And that dictates our perception of everything. Like if that Chris Rigg goal had gone in and been allowed and we hadn't conceded that stupid goal, and we're sat here this morning talking about 1-0 win at Sunderland, we're saying how good a bloody performance it was, how good a reaction it was to Port Vale. We showed great mental character. We've done this, that and the other. And we're lauding that performance. And when you pick it apart, yes, there's tons of things we could have done better, but it wasn't a horrendous performance. It wasn't a bad performance. Just those little bits didn't go our way. And I think, again, if you look at the players that we've got out, like Jason said, Lefay in that game is such a massive miss. Such a massive miss. He's been one of our best players this season. I would have him in the sort of top 3 for player of the season with Dan Ballard and Granit Xhaka, because he's just been so good all season. And he's so influential, and he's one of the players who can just create something out of nothing, create a little bit of magic. And yeah, I think we've got to keep all of that in mind when we're commenting on results, when we're commenting on form, when we're commenting on Bris's future. Absolute nonsense. Like it's just so important to retain that perspective, especially when we're going into this game against Newcastle on Sunday, and then we've got 3 weeks. And then that to me is a big stopping point. Get players fit, go on the training field, because not many of them are going away for international football. I think Siddiqui is, and that might be it, unless I'm mistaken. And then you've got another 7 games to finish the season off. So I think after this week we can kind of draw a line into this stage of the season and look forward to see what we can do in the 7 games, because the next 7 games after this, or 6 games after the Newcastle game, to me is a real run up to next season. And I think we need to just be content with, and that's not to say we shouldn't have expectations. It's not to say that we shouldn't be pissed off if we get beat. Of course we should. We're football fans. That's what we do. But with context, there's still an awful lot to be positive about. And I think, again, the injuries, you cannot underestimate the difference those injuries make for that squad and that shallow squad.
Well, just to give you the final word, Jason, and put it all into perspective, like Martin has for us, we're getting to that 40 points. We can't forget that it has been a fantastic season on that front. We would have taken that. That was the target. We've reached the target, so that's fantastic. And to put the performance into perspective, we've touched on it a little bit. That the question is, was that all that different from some of the performances at the beginning of the season where we got that big moment where Talby's chance went in and we went on to win the game, or we got back into the game afterwards with, a chance that we had after the opposition took the lead. Was it all that different? But those things aren't going for us. And of course, looking forward, we've got the Newcastle game where the Bris side has stepped up to those big games. You look at the City games, you look at the Arsenal games, and we've still got some great games at the Stadium Light coming up with Spurs, Forest, Man United and Chelsea. So got a lot to look forward to.
Absolutely. I mean, we sort of alluded to it all the way through the chat. I mean, but it's fine margins in the Premier League. And I know it's a cliche, but sometimes cliches are cliches for a reason. And, I think the best illustration you can have is that if you look at Sunderland's last 2 Premier League matches, okay, they created more, they looked brighter, they had better periods of possession and territory and all of those things against Brighton, and they've come away with a 1-0 loss at home. They did basically none of those things against Leeds United, and they've somehow managed to come away with all 3 points in a 1-0 win at Elland Road. That that just speaks volumes as to how cruel and how difficult and how much this division can swing on those simple moments, and I think ultimately, perspective is the word, isn't it? And we've used it a few times, but if you'd said at the start of the season Sunderland would be in this position at this stage of the campaign, would you have taken it? 100% you would have. And I think we all kind of maybe need to just keep that in mind a little bit. That's not to say you can't be critical, you can't have grievances. Of course you can. Like, playing football fans, you're allowed to have your opinions. Of course, but at the same time, I do think it's important to remember where the club's been in the very, very recent past and how well they've done to get to where they are right now. With regards to next weekend, look, would Sunderland want to be going into that game in better form and with more players available? Yeah, absolutely. But we, at the Echo, we speak to Kevin Phillips every week. He has like a little sort of chat with us every week. And one of the things that we asked him last week, I think the article actually comes out on Monday, but he said about the derby and should we be concerned about this? Because look at the form and the injuries and all this sort of stuff. And his point was, look, it's a derby and anything can happen on the day. Form goes out the window. As we saw back in December at the Stadium of Light, it's a case of who wants it more, who is better prepared for the sort of mental test of what that fixture embodies, who comes out with the bit between the teeth and who's really up for the fight. And I think that time and time again, Sunderland have shown that from even a standing start, when we think about the back end of last season, they are capable of bringing themselves up to that level. So the circumstances aren't ideal. Yesterday wasn't ideal, but there were things to be positive about. And there are reasons to be positive heading into next weekend. And then obviously beyond that, the rest of the season as well.
Yeah. Well, it's a brilliant place to end on with that defeat against Brighton firmly out of my system now. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Jason. Really appreciate your time, mate.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, lads. Always a pleasure.
Good stuff. And thank you very much, Martin, because we've got a lot going on this week, of course, in the build-up to the game against the visitors.
We have indeed. We've always got a lot going on. So we're the podcast, haven't we, with daily podcasts coming every day. It's hard to say anything else, isn't it? Daily podcasts coming frequently. And we've got our regular On This Week episode tomorrow. Which,
what did you say? I was going to put you on the spot. Come on then. What's on it?
I can't remember. Let me have a look. I don't know.
He spends so long, preparing for these On This Week podcasts and all this, and then they do them and record them and he forgets what they talk about.
Right. We are.
Go on, I'll put your time now. Go on, Mark.
You have given us a bit of time. That's very, very kind of you. We talked about Phil Gray. We have a little look back at Phil Gray's last game for the club away at Birmingham and the departure that happened in that summer, which is a bit strange, but we'll go into that. Kelvin takes us back to 1967 for the third game in the trilogy of FA Cup games against Leeds United at the very neutral venue Boothbury Park, which Kelvin still is incredibly pissed off about. And Andrew's dug out a brilliant story from 1903. And this was a game that we lost at Roker Park 1-0 at Sheffield Wednesday. And afterwards, the crowd was so annoyed and frustrated with the referee's performance. They they kind of mobbed up outside and were pelting the referee with oranges, apparently. And as a result, the club weren't able to play the last game of the season at Roker Park. We actually had to go and play our last game of the season at St James's Park. So the ground got closed for a week, for a game rather, because of the reaction to the referee's performance. But all may not have been quite as straightforward as it might seem. So you have to tune in and listen to Andrew's description of that one, because it's a fascinating one from 123 years ago.
Yeah, sounds like a juicy story, mate. But thank you very much, Martin, and thanks again, everyone, for listening. Don't forget, we'll have loads more analysis on the Roker Report website if you so wish. And of course, as we said, we'll have pods every day this week, as usual, leading up to our trip to the visitors. So look out for all of that. But from us, it's bye for now.